Okay, welcome to another short video with Happy Histories with Michael. And today we are at Clapham Common, the home of the Clapham Sect. The Clapham Sect were a group of prominent English gentlemen who they weren't a sect as such. They were given this title as a kind of a smear. Another nickname they had were the Saints. They were kind of led by William Wilberforce and John Thornton. William Wilberforce was an MP, and he had a religious conversion, and initially he wanted to just reform what was going on in this country. So he pressed for so that children wouldn't be exploited in the workforce, and he wanted members of Parliament to behave properly. But, of course, he's most well known for his work in the abolition of the slave trade. Now, the slave trade has always existed in this country. And when William the Conqueror wrote his Doomsday Book, he wrote down that 10% of the population of England were slaves. But during the Norman period and further on, slave morphed into serf. And in fact, the word servant comes from the word serf. And we had indentured labour and transportations, so it kind of, tweaked and, it changed as history went by. However, in the mid-1400s, Pope Nicholas V made a papal bull allowing the Portuguese to take slaves from Africa. This was in a reward for the Portuguese giving support to the Pope and against the Ottoman Empire. But the Portuguese took this as permission to take slaves willy-nilly and make a lot of money. And during Tudor times, there's one, I forget the name, but there was one chap, and he used to raid the Portuguese ships, steal the slaves, and sell them on himself. And this led to the famous triangular slave trade, where slaves would be taken from West Africa, sent to America. They would be sold there, where they'd work on huge cotton plantations and so forth. Then the cotton was shipped over to England, which really helped with the Industrial Revolution because we had cotton on a vast scale. And then they would buy goods there, sell it to Africans, buy more slave, and thousands, the majority of African Americans, are a product of that slave trade. This was brought to Wilberforce's attention and several other people. And in fact, when Wilberforce had his religious conversion, he wrestled with himself, and he thought to himself, he was a member of Parliament, but he thought, should I leave Parliament and become a clergyman? So he went for advice to John Newton, the author of the hymn Amazing Grace, and he asked him for advice. And he told him, he said, let Parliament be your pulpit. So he went into Parliament, and because John Newton, he was a slaver, he was enslaved in Africa, and eventually became a clergyman. So he told him all about what was going on. Anyway, the Clapham sect itself, something like that you couldn't do overnight. But William Wilberforce's cousin John Thornton, he was a banker, very, very wealthy, and he had a house over here. And he invited him to come over here to live with him. And then before we knew it, about 20 people were in grand houses around Clapham Common here. And they would very often meet here at Trinity, at the Holy Trinity Church. You know, it couldn't be done overnight. So actually in the early 1800s, they did manage to bring about the abolition of the slave trade in this country. And then, you know, in the 1830s, it was the trade was actually abolished overseas. And in fact, the English had a squadron patrolling the west coast of Africa, you know, apprehending slave ships. But anyway, this is where it all happened. And actually, it's very peculiarly enough, there's quite a long tradition with black history. So, you know, people from the Windrush generation, they came here and they were housed in bomb shelters here. Which brings me to, when you look at the plaque here, you can see this is shrapnel damage from when a bomb landed here and it damaged it. So there were bomb shelters over there. And those bomb shelters became the hotels where the Windrush generation were housed until they could get proper housing and proper work. And of course, Brixton is just up the road, and that's where the nearest labour exchange was. So they didn't go very far. Now, the other thing as well, just over to my right, Graham Greene had a house during the Second World War, and his mistress was staying there. And he wrote a book called The End of the Affair. And, you know, I can see the damage here. And in the book, and actually it's actually happened, his house was damaged and his lover was killed. And, you know, it's just these things, they link together. So actually it's all under construction now, so we can't go in. But if you're in London, it's well worth a visit to remember the saints, the Clapham Sect. Anyway, thank you for watching. Keep an eye out for more videos. Thank you. Okay, we are still in Clapham. This is Clapham High Street, and we're by this imposing structure here. And we've got about 8 of these around London, and I'm sure often people pass them and they think, what the hell are these? What these are actually are deep level bomb shelters. During the Second World War, the general public approached the government and said, look, we really need really solid bomb shelters, because they were going to the height of the Blitz. And particularly one incident prompted them to do this. It was when the bank station had a direct hit and there were a lot of casualties. So the government got together and said, okay, we will build some deep level shelters. And in fact, they built 8 of them. But, and they figured the best people to build these tunnels would be London Transport, because of course they had built the tube network. So 8 shelters were built, and they are, you know, all over the place. And the government tried to kind of sell them as kind of posh hotels sort of things. They were 3, you know, we have bunk beds where you have 2 bunks. These ones had 3. And in fact, if you were a resident, you could register with the council and you had your spot. But the only trouble was, when they were actually built, the Blitz had actually stopped, and there wasn't need for them until the V1s and the V2s started landing in London at the end of the war, and then they were used again. But they were, you know, they were really state of the art. Very bad timing, but for state of the art. So you had bedding, you'd have your ticket, they had canteens, medical centres, pipes, music, really posh places to stay. And in fact, 7 of the 8 are still owned by London Transport. And if you go to the British Transport Museum, you can have a tour. And the tour starts at Balham. They have one of these deep shelters there. And in fact, Balham had a really tragic accident during the Blitz. When the RAF checked out their radar, they knew there was a raid coming. The sirens would go on, people would go into the shelters, and they would actually close off. They had gates to close off the tunnels. And this was in case there was flooding and they wanted to keep the water away. But strangely enough, in Balham, people heard some noise behind the sealed off gate, and they were wondering what was going on, so they opened them, and of course the whole tunnel was flooded and there was great loss of life. And in fact, in the film Atonement, which stars Keira Knightley, this is where she meets her end when she dies in that place there. But they were used again by the Windrush generation. At the end of the war, a lot of people from the West Indies, Jamaica, they came over here, and it was good for us over here because there was so much work to be done. And we particularly needed people in the transport system, in the National Health Service, and so on. And these guys came over here on the HMS Windrush, which ironically had been a cruise ship owned by a member of the Nazi Party. Anyway, the guys came over here and there was nowhere for them to be housed. So they stayed here at the Clapham bomb shelter. But after about 4 weeks, they were all rehoused. Now the thing is, Brixton is just down the road, and that's where the nearest job centre was. So a lot of them went down there, found work there, and now, you know, Brixton is the Kingston of London, really. You know, a very vibrant place. I love it. Then, actually, these were used as kind of penny hotels. You could stay here cheaply, but there were no rooms with a view. Yeah, as you can see, it was all deep underground. And actually now, this is actually an underground farm where fruit and vegetables are produced. Because remember, these things, they could house about thousands of people. Okay, yes. Now, actually, this really has a connection with the black community, because in the 1956, Barbados had a lot of unemployment, and it was a colony, of course, so they asked the British government if they could give work to their population. And a lot of them were recruited into London buses. I worked with these guys, and they were the salt of the earth. And actually, this template whereby by London buses took a lot of drivers and conductors became the template for British Rail and the National Health Service. And a lot of these guys said, oh, we're going back to the mother country. A lot of them saw it as a temporary thing, but you know, now we've got generations of these guys here. And you know, I've got very, very personal, happy memories of, you know, these guys. They've enriched my life, yeah? And the other thing is, in the 1956, I think it was, we had the Festival of Britain. England was coming out of the austere times, rationing was no longer in force, and to lift morale, we had the Festival of Britain, and people were housed in these deep underground shelters. But also, I think it was in the 1950s at the Gooch Street deep level shelter, which is actually the headquarters for the Americans during the war. There was a fire, and after that they were all closed down. But you know, these are still alive and kicking. As I said, if you go to the London Transport Museum, you can arrange to go on a tour, and you know, I think it's well worth a visit. I intend to do it myself. Okay, thank you for watching. Look out for further videos, please.